Hi, I'm Judith Panero, the Executive Director for AAMC and AAMC Foundation, the leading organization for all art curators serving many, not few. It is a pleasure to welcome you to today's virtual discussion. Thank you for joining us. We hope that you, our community of colleagues, allies, and supporters around the globe are healthy and safe. In 2019, we held over 50 programs bringing together more than 1,300 individuals from 19 countries, providing an exchange of information on critical topics for the nonprofit arts community. Since early March of this year, our work has continued to address ongoing issues in the visual arts organizations, as well as concerns rising from the current pandemic. We've greatly enhanced an already robust online programming calendar by presenting varied offerings such as the one we are gathered together for today. With your participation and feedback, we continue to ensure we are addressing the needs of our audience and moving the field forwards towards an equitable, inclusive, and sustainable future. For many years, we have been presenting webinars, virtual programming, which are accessible on our website through archived recordings. You can also find information on upcoming ones on our website as well at artcurators.org. We hope that they provide actionable advice, value, and connectivity. We welcome all nonprofit art curators to join our organization. Benefits of membership include networking with our global audience, access to discounted and free in-person and virtual programs and fellowships, and importantly, the opportunity to be part of a unified voice for and of curators. Additionally, our foundation serves the larger curatorial and arts community, and should you wish, donations are welcome from you as an individual, a corporation, and/or foundation. Any amount will have direct impact on our work. You can see options for donating on our site. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the program.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Debbie DiVito. I'm a director and private banker at Citi Private Bank, and my role today will be to guide you through our presentation. On behalf of all my friends at the Association of Art Museum Curators, I am so excited to welcome all of you to today's webinar, Personal Finance 101. Today's webinar will follow a seminar format. We're going to feature 2 speakers, and we'll devote the last 10 or so minutes to answering your questions. So we encourage you to use that Q&A button down below to submit your questions throughout the presentation so that we can answer them at the end. Now I'd like to welcome our guest speakers and financial planning experts. They are Marina Rodriguez, who is a financial planner and vice president at Citi Private Bank, and Avani Ramnani, who is director of wealth management and financial planning at Francis Financial. In the interest of time, I've intentionally kept these introductions brief, but please do visit artcurators.org to learn more about our speakers and their backgrounds. Marina and Avani, welcome, and we are so excited to learn from you both today. Before we do get started though, I want to quickly acknowledge the broader environment that makes today's webinar topic front of mind for all of us. I'm very mindful that we've all been affected by this pandemic, both personally and professionally. We've all worried about the physical and financial health of our loved ones, and it's a period of strife due to social issues and unemployment. It's an unbelievably volatile environment, and we find ourselves craving stability, structure, and control. But human beings are resilient, and I, for one, am optimistic about the future. So why am I optimistic? Well, to start, we've learned a lot about COVID-19. We know the factors that lead to spread, and we know how to avoid them. We've learned that if we take the necessary precautions, we can keep ourselves and our families healthy. And while headlines are grim about the swift spread of the disease here in the US and in South America and other parts of the world, we're beginning to see new data supporting that it may be possible that the disease could be becoming less fatal overall. In short, yes, this is a health crisis, but it's one that we are slowly learning to live with. On top of that, the economic damage that we've seen to date, it's largely due to the fact that this is a man-made crisis. Before 2020, no one in the history of the world had ever voluntarily shut down the global economy. And in the past months, we've seen the repercussions of that action. But unlike the other crises that people like me have experienced, or maybe some of you today who are on Zoom with us have read about, this time we can turn on a switch. And in the past weeks, we've seen switches beginning to turn on. And we've seen signs telling us that this is something we're going to be able to come back from. On a global scale, government and fiscal and monetary responses to this crisis have been swift. As we see new cases rise, we expect to see that assistance continue. In the second quarter, you may have seen that the S&P 500 put up its best quarterly performance in the past 20 years. And unemployment, the numbers, while they're still high, they're on the decline. And the majority of the individuals who are unemployed expect this to be on a temporary, not permanent basis. But we cannot be blindly optimistic. We have to take proactive measures and positions to protect ourselves and our families from COVID and to position ourselves for the future. We must be prepared to weather those storms, and that's why today's presentation is so critical. Let's talk about the goal of today, why we all came together. My role in my 9-to-5 job is a private banker. And in that role, it's incumbent upon me to direct my high net worth clients to the right resources to accomplish their personal financial objectives. In the past 5 months, the most important thing that I could do for any of those individuals was to help them move from a fear mindset into a place of learning and growth. Today's webinar seeks to do just that, equip you and your family with the resources you need to take charge of your personal financial situation. I hope that you find today's presentation helpful. I hope that you'll ask us questions. And above all, I hope that 60 minutes from now, you find yourself feeling empowered and optimistic and excited about the future. So now I will pass it over to Marina, who's going to help us get started. Marina, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Debbie, for that introduction and kind of setting the stage. Really, there is no wrong time to kind of take a look at your personal financial situation and really put a plan in place. And if we want to jump right into the first slide of the presentation, which is actually page 2. Monica, can we jump one page? So really the first thing that people tend to ask me as a financial planner is, next slide, please, is where do you start, right? Where do I begin is the first kind of task at hand. So in order to assess your financial situation and set a plan, the first place to start is to really start thinking about, what are my goals? What do I want to achieve? And that can be anything from shorter term goals to longer term goals. So shorter term goals can be planning for education. That could be personal or for children. Perhaps thinking about purchasing a first home or a vacation home. Longer term goals are those associated with kind of retirement, right? Oftentimes we worry about, how much do I need to save while I'm working in order to have a comfortable retirement? And then there's things like legacy planning. So that's what, do I want to leave to my children or potential charity in the future? Once you've identified these goals, now is the time to get organized. So a great way to do this is by creating a budget. And really the first step in creating a budget is identifying your monthly income. So for our members that are getting, a salary, or I would advise to kind of start with the number that you receive after all kind of taxes have been taken, Social Security, any kind of benefits. So that's kind of where you start from. Then what you want to do is identify your monthly expenses. And once you've kind of gone through that process, you basically subtract the two and you determine whether you have a deficit or a surplus. So if you're running a deficit, then you want to, or perhaps, not as healthy of a surplus as you'd like, you'd want to start really assessing your expenses. A really great place to start is kind of prioritizing things from highest priorities, which is basically we all need a roof over our heads, the ability to put food on the table, covering kind of medical care. Those are kind of highest priority things that are must-haves and maybe a little less kind of negotiable. Then you want to get into kind of needs. And really needs are associated with ability to produce income. So that can include things like transportation costs. So either public transportation or a car and associated costs with that in order for you to be able to get to work. It could also include things like childcare. Next on kind of the list of priority would really be kind of legal related expenses, which is taxes, perhaps child support, things of that nature. Then you would take a look at debt and any loans. So that could be school loans, mortgages, maybe credit card debt. And kind of the last in terms of order of priority is really discretionary spending. So those are things like entertainment, travel, dining out, things like that. And that last bucket is really, if you're kind of assessing where can I reduce spending and maybe increase savings, it's really that discretionary bucket is the easiest place to start, because those are the things that you really have more control over. So instead of maybe getting that grande latte every day, you can either bring coffee from home or opt for a regular cup of coffee as opposed to the latte. Maybe ask yourselves a question for those listeners that maybe have children that are seniors, right? Is sometimes, you want to be able to provide and kind of reinforce kind of the hard work that your children have done in kind of progressing in their education. Some parents like to buy them new cars when they become seniors. So it's really the question of, does it need to be a brand new one? Can it be a used one? So just kind of asking yourselves those questions as you're reviewing those expenses. Other things to consider as you're kind of evaluating your cash flows and really getting a good financially healthy kind of balance sheet is also understanding your debt, right? And generally debt is debt, but those types of debt can have positive or negative consequences. So we typically split them into kind of good and bad. So if the debt that you take on helps you increase your net worth or generate income, that can be considered good debt. So those are things like mortgage on a home, student loans, right? You take on the debt of student loans with the hope that you'll be able to kind of achieve perhaps additional degrees in order to be able to generate higher incomes later on in the future. And then bad debt is generally, if you're borrowing money to make a purchase, that's generally considered bad debt. And as just some things to kind of keep in mind for anyone listening, if you're contemplating kind of looking at purchasing your first home, good like ratio, so debt to income. And when I mean income, I'm talking about gross income. So that's kind of before any taxes have been factored in. Is generally you want to keep total debt to income at about 36%. For getting pre-approvals for mortgages, anything over 43% is generally considered a red flag and is going to make the mortgage approval a little bit more difficult. And as you're kind of assessing and looking at all these things, you're also kind of determining where, once you kind of identify the goals and the savings and where you can come back, is kind of matching up. And Avani is going to get a little bit more into that. But once you kind of evaluated different savings buckets, so to speak of, you can start kind of aligning those savings with particular goals. And sometimes I get asked the question of, how do I know how much to save for all the different goals? And the answer is really, it's going to change over time. There are going to be some that are probably a little bit higher priority, and it's a little bit of a balancing act. And the last kind of really important piece in terms of, again, I was talking about that balancing act, is kind of the very, very first step is making sure you have an emergency fund. And that's particularly important. I think a lesson learned during this time, right? Many of us were affected by the pandemic, and either had maybe were furloughed for work or were reduced to part-time, and making sure that you have an emergency fund becomes really important. So typically the advice is 3 to 6 months worth of expenses. I can tell you for myself, I'll share a personal story. So my mother is divorced, and her source of income is from rental properties. And during this time, though I had encouraged her years when she first kind of got the divorce, was to build an emergency fund for herself, which thankfully she did, and has kind of helped us through this time, is, nobody kind of foresaw what was going to happen right now. And maybe 3 to 6 months may be a little bit light. And also when you're thinking about emergency funds, for myself, so my mother, because of, her tenants not being able to pay the rents, had to kind of rely on those emergency funds in order to sustain everything until things kind of slowly return back to normal. For myself, is what I realized, especially during this time, is I have my own emergency fund. So I have my own set of kind of savings kind of for these unforeseen circumstances and events that can happen during life. But now I think for myself, I have to also now consider potentially having another set of emergency funds kind of catered towards another member of my family. So just things to kind of keep in the back of your mind. And now I'm going to turn it over to Avani to discuss different kind of saving strategies.
Thank you, Marina. Move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So, Marina mentioned some guidelines, and really there's no magic number here. I wish somebody would just tell you, here you go, if you save this much, you're good to go, for the rest of your life. Unfortunately, it just doesn't work that way. But there are some guidelines. So you should consider saving approximately 15% of your gross income towards long-term savings. So not saving towards making a purchase such as a car or a TV or something like that, or the next vacation, but 15% of your income to save towards that long-term goal of retirement. I think that's a good number to work towards. More, the better. That's what I say. But that 15% number should be good. Marina also talked about expense management. So saving anything that is a surplus that you come into being. Maybe you get a raise, and then you just you earmark that raise towards savings. Maybe you get a bonus, and there's an extra bonus, hopefully, that comes along your way. So you can save that part. So really identify what are the pieces that you can easily save towards, save from your income. And then also do that planning for the big purchases. I always say that really the best way to figure out where you can save from is to do a deep reflection on what is the most important to you. So let's say getting that latte from Starbucks just makes your day go so much better. That particular thing is the most important thing to you. Well, then you know what? go get that latte. But if there are certain other smaller things that are not that important to you, maybe you can save there. So, just think about, and what Marina brought up was an amazing example of how she is thinking about one other person now that she has to prepare for. So that is very important to her, and she'll dedicate her savings towards that goal. So think about what's more important to you when you're thinking about expenses and savings. You can think about, one thing that, we're, it looks like a lot of women here, but the one thing we don't think about is investing. And it's really, really important. In fact, it's more important for women to do that investing piece, because we live longer, we take time out of the workforce longer, we provide support to others. So this piece really, we need our money to make money for us. So we have to think about that investment portfolio also. So all these savings that you do, and there are a couple of different buckets you can save in, right? There is that retirement plan that you might have from work. So you can save, as it shows here, this year you can save $19,500 if you're below 50. And if you're above 50, you get an additional $6,500 that you can save in your retirement plan. You can also save in traditional IRAs, which is $6,000 plus that $1,000 if you're above 50. So there are ways that you can save in the retirement plans, and that gives you a tax advantage. You don't pay taxes on this money that you put into the retirement plan, but when you take it out, you pay taxes. So you save in the time that you have, your income might be higher. You can save on those taxes. So, that's one bucket, but then the other bucket is outside of that retirement plan. You can also save there, invest that, make your money work hard for you. You can buy, bonds and stocks. And then, there are so many different strategies that you can employ to get more bang for the buck. Asset allocation, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. Asset allocation is extremely important, because sometimes we can get thrown off. If you're not, financial planners like Marina and I, and even Debbie is, you may not know how to invest and what's a good way to allocate your investments. But I'll share a few tidbits with you to help you gain more knowledge, and do that. Go out and get educated. It's not rocket science, I assure you, and you have so much help out there, but definitely use those opportunities. Thank you so much for moving to the next slide. So to think about asset allocation, if you look at the chart on the right, really, the chart shows that more than 90% of the effectiveness of your returns comes from that asset allocation strategy. It's how you invest in different parts of the market. So, we all hear about stocks and bonds, and then there are so many other things like mutual funds and ETFs, and there are all these different options out there. But what's important to devise is that allocation strategy, how much you invest in all these different parts of the market. And stocks and bonds sound very complicated, and sometimes they're made out to be, but at the very basic level, when you own a stock, you're basically an owner in the company. When you own a bond, you're loaning your money to the company. So a stock owner has a lot more risk than a bond owner, because the bond owner is assured that their money is going to be returned to them and that they're going to get paid an interest. Anyway, so putting that aside, since asset allocation is even more important than actually selecting which securities go into play, or timing the market. Oh, this looks like a great opportunity. The market has fallen 5%. Maybe I should buy now. These types of strategies add some value, and that's also questionable. There's research that shows that it doesn't add value consistently over a long period of time, and that there's no one person can get it right consistently. So, so that market timing also doesn't help. The most important piece is how you allocate your investments. So something to think about when allocating investments is risk tolerance. How much risk are you willing to take? And when we talk about risk, just inherently, if you invest more in stocks, you're taking more of a risk. Now, when we say risk, I know I specialize in working with women who are going through some difficult transitions, such as divorce and widowhood. And when I talk about risk with my clients, the first thing they come out and say, just hands down, is I am not a risky investor. I don't like risk. I don't want to invest in risky investments. Just invest me in the most safe investments. And that's understandable because inherently we are risk averse. But not all risk is created equal and not all risk is bad. So, and we have to understand that you have to take risk in order to accomplish those long-term goals. And there are good ways to take that risk. So I just want to put it out there, especially when we talk about risk tolerance. The other piece is diversification. Do not put all your eggs in one basket, as grandma used to say. So, the best way is to invest in different pieces of the market. And most of the time what happens is if one part of the market is doing well, the other part of the market may not be doing so well. But you don't know exactly when each part of the market is going to do or worse or better. So it's good to invest in different types of investments so that you know for sure that if one part goes up, even if the other part goes down, it's going to be okay. And that's a way to actually reduce your risk by investing in different parts of the market. So it's really important to use that asset allocation. And then the tax piece makes a big difference too. The way I look at creating a portfolio is that this retirement piece and the non-retirement piece, they both work together. So think of them as two pockets in your shirt, and it may be a man's shirt, but still two pockets in your shirt, and they belong, both those pockets are your pockets, and one may be heavier than the other because you may have more assets in retirement or not, but it really doesn't matter. But it's more important to think about which investment should I put in which pocket so that I get the most efficient tax structure. So I'm not punished on taxes by picking the wrong investments for the wrong pocket. So that's again a nuance that goes into this asset allocation strategy. Then consider, there are other vehicles that allow us to make investments. So there are a lot of mutual funds out there and ETFs. What these are baskets of stocks and bonds, or bonds, depending on how the mutual fund is structured. But they're basically allowing you to own many different stocks and or bonds in one umbrella, under one umbrella. So you just go buy a few shares of this mutual fund, and then you get, by definition, through that mutual fund, you get access to all these multiple investments, which is the beauty of it, because then you don't have to go and buy each investment. It's easier to deal with for the retail investor. So that's a very, very good way to invest in the markets. The other piece is that if you're just a first timer, if you have no knowledge of any of this, a very simple way to invest is target date funds. So many of these institutions out there, Vanguard, Fidelity, Schwab, Citi, and pretty much everyone, whoever has mutual funds, pretty much everyone has target date funds. And what these are, if you say that, let's say my target for retirement is in 20 years, then you pick a target date fund that is for that 20th year, and then the fund managers change the investments within the funds as you come closer to that target date. So the closer you are to that target date, the more conservative that fund becomes, because then you come closer to taking money out. So that's another concept that is important to know. And then dollar cost averaging is just, you invest your money on a regular basis. So for example, the retirement plan is a wonderful way to dollar cost average into the market, where every month or every 2 weeks or whatever your paycheck is, however your paycheck is structured, on that regular time frame, you are putting money in the market, and you're buying whatever investments you're buying in your account. And if the market's going up, you're putting in money, at each level as it is going up. So yes, you are buying some investments that are more expensive than when you had bought a few months ago, but that's okay, because if the other situation were true, if the market was going down, you would still be partaking in that, where you would buy more of that investment as the market falls. So, either way, and again, you don't know when the market's going up or down. So either way, that strategy works out, studies have proven. We move to the next slide. I will pass it back to Marina.
Great, thanks. So we've talked about kind of how to maximize your savings, and then Avani discussed ways in order to kind of manage those savings and different options for that. She talked a lot about kind of managing the risk within a portfolio and diversification. So another really kind of area of risk to your financial picture is what we're going to cover next. And one of the quickest ways to disrupt even a very thoughtfully laid out plan is through either the lack of insurance coverage or insufficient insurance coverage. And as we go through, we're covering a lot of information. So just a reminder to, please post your questions, and we'll be happy to address these, as I know that, what we're covering is kind of the basics, and there's a lot of details that goes into a lot of the things that we're mentioning today. So we're going to start with life insurance coverage, and there's two types: permanent versus term. So term life insurance provides a specific amount of death benefit for a certain length of time, and the premiums tend to be lower. And what does term insurance typically do? It usually serves as an income replacement. So if you're married and there's a sole kind of breadwinner, what would happen to your spouse if something were to happen to you? Where would the funds come in order for them to kind of sustain their lifestyle? So that's what we mean by income replacement. It could also be to cover debts, right? So you own a home. You want to, again, in the event of your untimely demise, you want to make sure that your significant other is not kind of saddled with really heavy debts. So you could consider amounts to kind of cover mortgages or any kind of large outstanding debts. And then when we talk about permanent policies, there are different types of permanent policies, and they have also a death benefit amount, and then something that's called cash value. And that's something that accumulates through time through kind of the payments of premiums. And there's different types of policies. There's whole life, universal life, variable universal life, with the differences really being the kind of accumulation of cash value and the growth of that. So there are different types that kind of the rates and the earnings that kind of grow as savings are controlled by the insurance company. And then there are others like variable universal life, where you have the ability to kind of select investments from. It's almost like your 403B, right? There's a specific set of options that you can choose in order to kind of maximize potential savings and growth over time. But permanent placement policies are typically thought of to cover kind of potential estate taxes in the future, or to leave a specific legacy or amount for your heirs. Those policies do tend to be a little bit more expensive precisely because of how they're designed and the length of time, right? They are really there in place forever or until you pass. Another area of risk and is disability insurance. So most of us have access to both short and long-term disability through our specific employers. But why are these kind of coverages important? There's actually the Social Security Administration kind of recently put out some information that 1 out of 4 20-year-olds today will have a chance of needing some sort of disability coverage for, you know, a short period of time before they're 67. And we think about like disabilities and sort of like catastrophic fall, but it doesn't. Disability coverage can also cover things like health issues that arise from not being able to do work. So there's different types of coverages, and when you're thinking about short and long term, short-term disability tends to be for kind of, again, shorter periods of time. Benefits last usually about 3 to 6 months. And before they kick in, there's usually kind of a waiting period of about, 8 to 15 days. Each policy is a little bit different. And long-term disability is really important because that's if, there's a longer-term issue that will prevent you from kind of earning. And those benefits are usually paid out for longer periods of time. It could be something for a specific period of time, say like 5 years, or it can go all the way up to kind of what full retirement age is considered, which is 67, or some variation in between. The waiting period to receive these benefits, right, because there's, you need to go to the doctor and show proof and all of that, is usually about 90 days. Again, different types of policies can be longer than that. And when thinking about kind of adequate coverage, you should be thinking about looking to replace something between 60 to 70% of your gross income. But that is also very closely kind of tied to expenses. So I would make sure that you have enough coverage to kind of cover the expenses that you need on a day-to-day basis. Other things to be aware of for disability is there's a lot of kind of language involved in them. So there's things like there are disability policies where you are covered for your own occupation versus any occupation. So what does that mean? Own occupation means that you will receive the coverage only if you're unable to perform your specific job, versus any is you're not able to kind of perform, and that's a little bit kind of broader term. And other things to consider is if you do have a kind of high income potential, right? So if there's any kind of members in the audience that are receiving a salary and have benefits through their firm, but maybe perhaps they have other types of jobs or kind of private kind of contracting work that supplements their lifestyle, you want to think about coverage of that total income amount. So looking into individual disability policies may be important there, particularly for replacing kind of high income needs. And things to be aware of are terms like non-cancelable or guaranteed renewable, meaning that, just with any insurance product, there is kind of a health assessment that's done, and that determines the amount of premium. So having some of those additional benefits means that you will be covered and you will always have that type of policy. Now, granted, these things do come with a kind of additional cost. So you kind of have to weigh out what I'm receiving versus kind of your cash flows. And can I cover the cost of having some of these extra benefits in these types of policies? Another area is long-term care, which basically protects assets from the burden of needing extended care later on in life. They can be quite costly. According to the Administration of Community Living, which is part of the Department of Health, 70% of people turning age 65 can expect to use some form of long-term care during their lives. So again, long-term care policies, kind of the evolution of them has changed over time. They're quite costly at this point, but there are kind of new types of life insurance products that do offer things like long-term care riders that can also be looked into as well. Other areas to kind of think about in terms of kind of risks or derailments to a well thought out plan is health insurance coverage, right? Kind of determining what is the best coverage for me, right? There are things like high deductible plans versus where the premiums are lower, but they're higher out-of-pocket costs versus paying higher, lower premiums. And there's kind of pros and cons to each. So I think when thinking about those, you wanna first assess what makes the most sense to you. If you're someone that just goes to the doctor maybe once a year, high deductible policies tend to cover those. If you're someone that, you know, have some sort of underlying health conditions, you may wanna, it may make more sense to kind of stick with a traditional policy with the lower premiums, and you wanna ensure that your doctors are being covered by that specific policy, that prescriptions are covered, any specialist medications, so those things to consider both for medical and dental coverage. Finally, under insurance is what is called property and casualty coverage. That's auto insurance, home insurance, and liability. So home and auto is really to protect you on the things that you own, whereas the liability, or what is called an umbrella policy, is really meant to protect you from lawsuits. So in terms of thinking about umbrella coverage, the things you want to be careful of is to not have any gaps. So an umbrella kind of usually comes in on top of existing coverages, but there's usually verbiage in there that says you are required to have a certain amount. So say your umbrella coverage comes in, you know, they will pay for some sort of suit at 500,000 and above, but your homeowner's coverage stops at, or auto stops at 300,000. So that's considered a gap in coverage where you would have to come out of pocket completely. So just kind of being thoughtful to those things. And then also, again, specifically for umbrella coverage, is it in terms of sizing and things like that, is you want to make sure that you're kind of covering your net worth, right? And that can change over time. So that should kind of be assessed on an ongoing basis. And really, with all of these, it's really determining a deductible amount that you're comfortable with. And again, that's all kind of tied back to those cash flows and assessing kind of how much room do you have and what can you really afford to do. Next slide, please. So finally, this kind of brings the financial planning aspect. And there's one more piece that Avani is going to cover, but this is really kind of tying everything together, right? These exercises and things that we're advising you to look at should really be done on an ongoing basis. Things change, personal circumstances change. New children can be born later on in life, other grandchildren. Markets change, right? Who would have foreseen what we're living through right now? As well as policies, right? So tax policies change. And throughout everything, you kind of want to make sure that you're thinking about everything. Again, priorities adjust. So you want to kind of look at everything on a pretty regular basis. And there are tools out there that kind of you can track expenses. I think Mint is a really popular one, but there's the kind of new software that's coming out, I feel like, every day. And then also thinking about as your timeline changes, for meeting certain goals. So things like retirement is also thinking about how your asset mix should change, right? So that goes back to what Avani was discussing in terms of kind of diversification and managing portfolio structures and risk return, right? So typically Now, this is not necessarily the case for everyone, but typically for longer term goals, you have the ability to take on more risk earlier on, because your ability to recover from market conditions like what we just experienced is longer term. Whereas as you approach retirement, those dollars become more important, and it needs to be a little bit more secure, maybe a little in a little less volatile types of investments. So really, again, it's just reviewing everything on an ongoing basis and making the changes as needed. And I'm going to turn it over to Avani to discuss kind of the final piece that can kind of derail all of your best plans, which is estate planning.
Thank you, Marina. So if we could move to the next slide, please. We'll touch on some really basic aspects of estate planning. The one thing I do want to highlight is that, whenever we think of estate planning, you might think, oh, that's for the ultra wealthy, it doesn't affect me really. And that's not necessarily true. Yes, it does impact the ultra wealthy, especially if they have to think about what taxes they might have to pay and how they pass on their wealth to their children and heirs. But it is really, really important for everyday folks just like us. So, basically everything that you're trying to cover in these documents is to let the important people in your lives know what your wishes are, what you really want to have happen once you're gone. So, there can be important things like who will take care of all the business of the estate that needs to happen once I'm gone. Who will take care of my children? This is the most important thing if you have small children, is to appoint guardians for your minor children. So there are all these different aspects that we'll talk about right now. So, the most basic thing is who gets what and when. And, it's funny because every person has a slightly different take on it, or could have a slightly different take on it. One of my clients is just thrilled to be able to give her wealth to her children now as gifts. And she says, yes, they'll get it when I'm gone, but I want to see them enjoy these gifts that I'm giving them. And I want to see that they're doing something with it and what they're doing with it. And I just want to get that pleasure of having them enjoy this money while I'm still around. So what her wishes is to have a gifting strategy in place, which balances out the fact that she needs this money to live on, right? So that whole balance of how much do you keep for yourself, and then if you have this goal of gifting to your family, then how do you manage that? And then I have another client who says that, I want to enjoy my life right now, and my children can get my money once I'm gone. And then they'll do what they'll do with it. But at least I want to enjoy my money while I'm still alive, which makes perfect sense too. And so she is the kind of person who actually is very involved in charitable causes. There are two causes that are so dear to her heart, and she donates her money while she's alive, and she's very active in these two charities. And she gets to do what she's really enjoying doing. So, her goal is to actually be that charitable donor and make a difference to people's lives and see the difference she's made while she's still alive. So, I encourage my clients to let their values guide them. Values, I feel like, are at the core of everything you do, including your money. So how you include those values in your saving and spending strategies, how you include them in your wealth, passing down your wealth, estate planning strategies, it really makes a difference on on defining and getting very clear on what your values are. So, these are the types of things that you can address through these documents. How will if you're distributing your assets once you have passed, how should they be distributed? Do your children get all the assets at once, no matter what their age is? Or if you have younger children and you, let's say, passed away yesterday, would that actually put your children behind in some way, because they would get access to all this wealth that their brains are not ready to handle yet? So, all these types of decisions you can convey through your estate planning documents. And then if taxes are a problem or are a concern for you, right now the estate planning rules are very, very generous in terms of how much you can exempt from taxes. So for many people, this is not even a consideration. But if it is, and then the other thing I should mention is that the federal exemption is much higher than many of the state exemptions are. So New York State exemption is half of what the federal exemption is. So you may have an issue with the estate plan for your state. But if that, so if those taxes are a concern, those can be addressed in these documents as well. And, whether they go through a trust, what kind of trust, there are so many wonderful strategies that attorneys have come up with that you're able to use to accomplish all these goals that you might have. So really, those are the types of things. And then once you put an estate plan into place, it's very important to actually mirror your current financial situation so that these plans can be executed well. So for example, if you want to put a life insurance policy in a trust, you already have this life insurance policy, and then your attorney recommends that you put it in a trust. Well, if you don't take action to actually go back and change the titling and the beneficiaries, etc., on that insurance policy, that plan is not going to get executed. So you really have to go back and make sure that action steps are actually taken in order to translate that plan to the reality. So, these are the important things to think about when you're doing your estate plan. And again, if your situation is fairly simple, it's not very expensive to do, really. So go out there, and there are attorneys who work with you on a flat fee basis, some work on an hourly basis. And really, it doesn't cost a lot to put all this in place so that your heirs are taken care of once you're no longer there. If you could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. And, so once you do have an estate plan in place, then can you just wash your hands off or dust your hands off and step away forever? Not really, because you know what? Life happens and things change. So you do need to go revisit these plans on a periodic basis. We say at least take a look every 5 years to just double check, make sure things are okay. But definitely if something big changes in your life, so if you have, if more children are born to you, if you have grandchildren that you want to incorporate and you haven't taken care of already, if you go through a divorce, this is a big one. Many of our clients that come in are going through divorce, and you don't think about it, but you have beneficiary designations to your spouse or ex-spouse now, but they're not changed. And so if you have a life insurance policy and you've designated your now ex-spouse as the beneficiary, if you don't change it, doesn't matter whether you're divorced or not, that money will go to your ex-spouse. So events like this are a big prompt for you to go revisit your documents. Marriages, blended families, this is coming up more and more right now. Even documents around your health. So there is a whole, there's like 2 or 3 documents around what happens to you if you're not capable of making your own health decisions. Who do you ask to take those decisions for you? You need to set that up. Otherwise, your loved ones are not going to be able to make any decisions for you in the absence of those documents. So, those are the things that you should think about. Financial changes, if there is a change in, significant change in your net worth, it's important to revisit. If you're retiring, it's important to double check that everything is how you want it to be. And then if laws change, right? I was mentioning the exemptions right now are very generous, but with all the money the government is spending right now, people are not sure those generous exemptions are going to stay on. Those are expected to reduce significantly. And if that happens, many more people will have to think about the tax implications of their estate plan. So I know Marina and I have given you so much information. It's like drinking from a fire hose. But please do put questions in the chat box. We're happy to address them. And I believe this is the end of the presentation, unless I'm missing one more slide.
Yeah.
Yep, it is the end of the presentation. So yes, we're ready to take on questions.
Yeah, thank you, Marina and Avani. Now let's begin the Q&A portion. I've gotten some great questions, which I think means that our audience has found the content helpful. So thank you both. To kick things off, I want to direct this question to you, Avani. Are there strategies for eliminating bad debt, especially when bad debt is carrying you through a crisis, a particular strain, i.e. a pandemic? What are your thoughts on that, Avani?
So, I completely understand. Sometimes you just have to take on debt to be able to meet your expenses. The way to tackle it is that when you are in a position to start paying off these debts, that you pay off the highest interest rate debt first. So whatever debt you're paying the highest interest rates on, that should be your target to minimize as soon as possible. So that's one thing. The other thing to think about is, do you have options? So for example, if this pandemic is really hit you hard, there are sources that you can go to. So you can take a distribution from your retirement plan. You can take a loan from your retirement plan, and they've waived some of these penalties that are otherwise there, under normal circumstances. They have, if you take money out of your retirement plan before you're age 59 and a half, you get hit with a 10% penalty. They waived it for this time period. I believe it's through September. So they waived that penalty, and you can take money out of your retirement plan in order to meet your expenses, or if it turns out the bad debt. I wouldn't specifically encourage that to be your first source of funding. If you're able to work and if you're able to manage getting some source of funds from anywhere else, I would recommend that to be preferred. But if there is no other way and you have to dip into your retirement plan, there is one rule that you can take advantage of. There are other things too, like, if you wanted to repay this back, then you can repay it within 3 years. You can pay the taxes over it in 3 years. Because remember, if you take money out of your retirement plan, you do have to pay taxes on it. So, but they've given they've modified the rules so that it's a little bit easier for people to take advantage of this.
Great. And Marina, I have a question for you about life insurance. Should everyone carry life insurance? What factors go into determining whether life insurance is appropriate for people as individuals. For example, say you're in your mid-30s, you have no children. Do you need life insurance?
So typically life insurance is meant to protect people who are relying on you from a kind of support standpoint. So if you're single, but there are other family members that may be relying on you, it may be something that you'd want to consider. And the sizing of it is really dependent on kind of what the need is and how much support it needs to provide, right? So for somebody, you know, single, no responsibilities, nothing of that, I would say no, life insurance is not necessary.
Great. I have a question. Avani, I'll direct this to you to start, and then Marina, if you can jump in. A couple questions on the theme of okay, we need advice. How do we go about finding the right people to give us that advice? And the first question here is, what's the ideal team of professionals that you would gather? An estate lawyer, a financial advisor, is there anyone else? And then how do you go about identifying the right person? Is it as simple as Googling? Where do you go? How do you even start?
It's a great question. So yes, I mean, having a team is really important, especially if you're going through a difficult time. I think that's critical at that time. And I'll share this. I think we're all women on the forum. Women, when it comes to that time, a difficult time in their life, they too do tend to bring people in towards them to help them through. So it's really important. It just works for us. So the way, you know, I ideally envision this is to get advisors that you think that you can trust, put your best interest ahead of theirs. So it's really important for you to understand, is there a conflict of interest? Is the advice that the advisor is giving you aligning with the compensation that they get? So really, if there is a conflict of interest on that, then you have to understand that conflict of interest, and you have to have that trust in the advisor that they will put your needs ahead of themselves. So these are the types, some of these characteristics I would look for. The players on the team, especially the way I practice, at least, and we practice in our firm, is that we are a comprehensive advisor, which means that we are your friend when if it touches anything to do with your finances. So we will have a role to play if it's in your estate planning. We will have a role to play with insurance. We will have a role to play in all these we give advice on all these different things. Now, we don't specifically actually sell you any products or investments that we get a kickback or commission on. So we're very clear on our no conflict policy. But if you have one person who's the quarterback of the team and they can coordinate the different players on the team, that works really well, because this one person knows everything that's going on in your financial life and then can bring in other players at the right time with the right framework. So I think that structure works really well.
Marina, can I ask you to add on to that, go a little bit deeper as it relates to tax advice, given state, country-specific aspects of all this, how it can be so individually tailored? Is it important to include a tax advisor as well?
Sure. So I just want to add on to a couple of things that Avani mentioned in relation to the team. This also relates to a tax advisor. Is one of the ways to kind of determine what the ideal team would be is also to look at credentials, right? So there are different types of advisors, like Avani mentioned, in terms of kind of compensation and kickback, but looking for credentials such as the CFP, which is a certified financial planner, which Avani are both are, we are kind of mandated. We have a fiduciary duty to put your interests best. And then with respect to a tax advisor, similarly, you want to make sure that it's somebody with credentials so that it is a certified public accountant. I would say that with respect to kind of specific state nuances and things like that, that as your financial picture gets more kind of complex over time, that it is kind of key and important, and just kind of echoing what Avani mentioned in terms of having a kind of a primary person. I'll mention at Citi, it works similarly in terms of kind of Debbie as a private banker is kind of that main person who knows the client well and brings in the different specialties. And we'll bring in myself as a financial planner to kind of look at the picture. There'll be an investment person to focus on investments. There's a wealth planner to focus on the trust and estate aspect of it. And then we'll also kind of look further in terms of bringing in a tax advisor as appropriate, given specific situations. Hope that answers the question.
That's really helpful. Go ahead, Avani.
Sorry, I just had one thing, and I keep going back to that values piece. I do think it's very, very important to find the right fit in terms of personality and what you value in your advisor as well, because hopefully this is a relationship for life. It's very important to, first of all, find good advisors and to be able to trust them. And then once you find them, you want to have a long-term relationship. So really, you're not, hopefully you don't just look for someone who will be a, yes man kind of person, conform to everything you say, to every need. You want that coach who might push you in a direction that you need to be pushed on, but you're resisting. So you really should look for someone who can help guide you, who can help you make these difficult decisions at a time when you may not be able to think through all the different aspects.
I have one follow-up question here, and I think it's a great one, a fair one. So who makes the best quarterback? And I will give my 2 cents here quickly. As Marina said, I'm a private banker and a generalist. So if you think about a great parallel is a doctor, a general practitioner who you go to, who knows you, who knows your family, but then can deliver the right resources based on your needs. Depending on your individual needs, that quarterback can take shape in the form of a banker. As Avani said, it needs to be a personality fit. It needs to be someone who hears your values and can take those to heart when they are giving you advice, when they are supporting you. But depending on your situation, the quarterback could be someone else. It could be a financial planner. It could be an attorney. It's someone who has a complete holistic understanding of you, is not viewing you in a vacuum. It's not a transactional relationship, but a relationship, as Avani said, potentially for life. Avani, Marina, anything you want to add to that?
Just one thing I think I saw in the Q&A box was, how do I find this person? Should I just Google them? And yes, this is a little bit more tricky, although, Googling is totally fine because you can find more people. I think asking the right questions is very important. So yes, you can Google all these people, but really ask them these tough questions, these questions that you really care about, and see how they respond. And trust your gut. I feel like we don't give enough credit to our intuition. And I really feel, just trust your gut, because it will lead you to the right person. So ask tough questions, ask questions that you want to know more about. Think of that personality fit. And even if you have to Google the initial list, that's okay, but just make sure that they're a good fit for you by asking questions.
Thank you, Avani. We have one more question, and then I think we'll wrap it up. The question is this. So I have a basic savings account and a 403B. I'm just starting a 529. I'm thinking about bigger picture items, and I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed. How do you know when it's time to engage a financial planner? And then what can you do in preparation for that relationship?
So how do you know when to engage a financial planner? I may be a little bit biased, but I think that everyone could use a financial planner. The good news is that they all don't cost an arm and a leg. So yes, there are financial planners that are more expensive than others, but fortunately, there is a good fit for everyone. There are planners who work with you on an hourly basis. So you just meet with them, you know, how much ever time it takes for them, which could be like 8 to 10 hours. They spend that time and you pay them for that time, and then you're done. And those types of planners, I feel like, are a great fit for someone who's starting out or whose situation is fairly simple. Let's say they don't have any dependents. They have, they are working and they are saving, and they just want to know, okay, you know, how should I invest my retirement account? And it's great for them because you just go to them, they'll create a plan for you, and they will set you on a path to succeed. And then yes, every 2 or 3 years you revisit and make a plan update. If there's something that has changed in your life, your goals may have changed, your circumstances. But that's, you know, it's a great opportunity to work with an hourly planner. And then things, you know, as things get more and more complex, and you have a retirement plan, and you have 2 children that you want to plan for their education, and then you're looking at, you know, what about me? You know, what are my goals? I want to buy a second home at some point. Just all these, as things get more complex, you might need something more than just somebody who works on an hourly basis or does a touch point 2 or 3 years. You may need someone who works with you consistently. You know, more complex than that, you might have a complex compensation structure. So you have stock options and, ISOs and non-qualified stock to think about. So it is really dependent on the complexity, and there are planners that cater to all, the whole spectrum of needs.
Wonderful.
And I would just add to that, in terms of just thinking about other options, especially if you're just kind of starting out and kind of just want someone to kind of bounce ideas or questions off of. Sometimes your retirement plan provider has access to kind of advisors that you can just kind of ask these questions of. Certain kind of robo platforms, so those are kind of like automatic investments, also have access to advisors, and that can be a cost-effective way. And then there's also different types of kind of nonprofits, right? So even I believe like Robinhood, or there's a lot of other places that you can go for essentially free advice. There's, you know, I believe the CFP board or the Financial Planning Association has like pro bono type. So you can seek those out if you're not in a position to actually take on that fee of hiring somebody. And then later on, once you're in a better kind of financial position and your situation does get complex, then you can kind of go back and revert to some of those more kind of traditional planning type of firms and advisors.
That's really helpful, Marina. Avani, thank you. You've certainly given us all a lot to think about and plenty of resources to help us, as I said at the beginning, move into that growth mindset. To my friends at AAMC, particularly Mary Kate O'Hare, who made today possible, bringing us together, Monica Valenzuela, who's been super helpful in organizing today's webinar. Thank you. I speak on behalf of Marina and Avani when I say it was our absolute honor and pleasure to participate. To our amazing audience, we appreciate your time, and we are sincerely wishing you and your families the absolute best in the future. I'll remind you that our bios are available on artcurators.org. All of our contact information is there. We do this because we love it. And if there's anything that we can do for you and your families, please don't hesitate to shoot us an email. We'd be happy to help direct you to the right resources, even if it's something that we personally can't do to help you. So with that, I will thank everyone once again for your time. And again, we're wishing you all health and success in the future. Take care and thanks again.